The email arrived at 5:42 p.m., just as the office lights dimmed and people shuffled papers. Eager to flee into the weekend, the subject line was sterile. Termination of employment. My eyes scanned the single paragraph, each word cutting deeper than the last. I wasn't being let go for poor performance, not for a mistake, not even for a breach of trust. No, my career of 15 years ended because I had missed a golf game with William Dane, the CEO who measured loyalty not by competence, but by tee times. I stared at the screen, waiting for some hidden line, a qualifier, a reason that would make sense. None came. The truth glared back at me in black and white. I was disposable, replaced not by skill, but by ceremony. Let me pause for a moment. How are you doing today, if you've been sitting for too long? Take a second to gently roll your wrists. It eases hidden tension more than you realize. And while you're here with me, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to tap the like button and hit subscribe. It helps me share more of these untold truths. Now, back to the story. The whispers began before I even logged off. Colleagues gathered in corners, voices low but sharp enough to slice through the air. "Miss Golf, lose job," one said with a half laugh. Another replied, "Everyone knows Dane values his foursome more than his board." I could feel their eyes darting toward me, then away, like I was already invisible. The shame burned hot across my cheeks, not because I had failed, but because I had been discarded for something so trivial, so absurd, that it cheapened everything I had built. I reached for my bag under the desk. My hand brushed against a folded card I had tucked away that morning, a birthday card for my daughter, Sophia. She had turned 12 today. I had promised her we would celebrate after work. Just the two of us. The thought struck me like a blow, while I was being erased for skipping a golf match. I had already sacrificed the chance to be with my child on her special day. Duty to the company had cost me moments I could never reclaim. As I rose, silence followed. No one offered a word of comfort. My badge would no longer open the doors I had once secured for everyone else. I walked toward the elevator, carrying not just a cardboard box of belongings, but the bitter weight of humiliation. Golf had cost me my career, and for the first time in years, I had no defense. The memory of that morning kept replaying in my mind like a tape I couldn't stop, long before the office filled with chatter. I was already at my desk, combing through alerts. At 6:30 a.m., the system had flagged unusual probes brushing against our outer firewall. It wasn't noise, not the harmless pings we saw every day. These were coordinated touches, quiet but deliberate, like someone running fingers across a locked door, testing for cracks. I walked into the executive huddle, carrying the printouts and my laptop. The directors were gathered, coffee steaming, waiting for Dane to set the tone. He leaned back in his chair, confident as always, talking about how today was about relationships. He meant the golf game. Of course. I cleared my throat and began. "We've had a series of breaches at the perimeter. I recommend—" But before I could finish, Dane cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Not today, Maribel. Don't bring that doomsday tone into this room. Our partners flew in for a game, not for scare tactics." I felt the room tilt against me. Still, I pressed on, sliding the report across the polished table. "These are not false positives. The patterns match early-stage infiltration attempts. If we don't act now—" That's when the PR director chimed in, her voice smooth but slicing. "We don't want to frighten our guests right before they head out. Let's keep the energy positive, shall we?" She smiled as if she had solved something delicate, when, in truth, she had dismissed the very danger I was paid to detect. The paper sat untouched in front of Dane. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, he pushed it back toward me with one finger, a gesture that said more than words. "You don't belong in this conversation." I looked around the table, searching for support. Finance avoided my eyes. Operations checked his phone. Even the legal counsel, who once told me he trusted my instincts, kept his lips sealed. The silence was deafening, and in it, I understood. My expertise had no weight compared to a scheduled tea time. A bitterness rose in my throat as I gathered my papers. I had sacrificed nights, weekends, even birthdays to keep this company safe. Yet, in the one moment I asked them to listen, I was treated like a nuisance. It was not just professional dismissal, it was personal erasure. When the meeting adjourned, the executives filed out with easy laughter, talking about the weather on the course. I stayed behind a moment, staring at the empty chairs, the abandoned coffee cups, the place where my report had sat unopened. My hands trembled as I folded it back into my folder. That morning, I walked out of the conference room not just unheard, but undone. The system had spoken, and I had spoken for it, but truth had no place in that building when vanity was on the line. The moment I stepped out of the CEO's office with the termination email still echoing in my mind, 2 security guards were already waiting. Their presence wasn't violent, but it was final. One gestured toward my desk, his face stiff with the kind of politeness that only makes humiliation sting more. "Please gather your belongings, Ms. Carter. We'll escort you out." I walked through the rows of cubicles, every step amplified by the hush that fell around me. People pretended to stay busy, eyes fixed on screens, hands typing nonsense just to avoid looking at me. The sound of my own heels clicking against the floor felt like a drumbeat announcing my disgrace. At my desk, I reached under to pull out my bag, sliding in a few personal things: a framed photo of my daughter Sophia, a fountain pen my father had once given me, and the birthday card I had planned to hand her tonight. My throat tightened. It should have been a night of balloons and cake, not cardboard boxes and whispers. As I zipped my bag, I felt the heat of a phone camera. Across the aisle, a younger employee, barely out of college, full of smirks and ambition, was holding his phone up just enough to snap a picture. A moment later, the muffled sound of laughter from a group chat confirmed what I already suspected. Within minutes, a caption appeared on the company's internal board: "Miss Golf, lose job." The phrase burned hotter than the termination notice itself. That was how 15 years of dedication was reduced. An inside joke. A meme for people who had never lost a night of sleep defending the system I had built. The guards flanked me as I made my way to the elevators. I kept my head high, though inside I was shrinking. No one spoke. A few colleagues glanced up, then quickly backed down, ashamed of their own silence, yet unwilling to break it. Isolation pressed in from every side. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls, tired eyes, clenched jaw. A woman stripped of her role, but not her pride. For a fleeting second, I thought of my father. He had been a police officer, a man of few words but unshakable conviction. I could almost hear his voice, calm and stern. "An nin kong fai tro choi. Security is not a game." He would have known this humiliation wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to the people who had traded vigilance for vanity. When the doors opened at the lobby, the guards led me across the marble floor to the exit. The building's glass doors reflected the city's lights back at me, but they also reflected something harsher: the image of a woman abandoned by the very company she had sworn to protect. Alone, I stepped out into the night air, carrying a bag of personal items and a weight of shame that words could not measure. That night, the silence in my apartment was heavier than usual. The city outside hummed with its ordinary rhythm, cars moving down wet streets, a siren far away, but inside, everything felt suspended, like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. I set my bag on the table, the birthday card for Sophia still inside, unopened. I couldn't bring myself to face her smile yet, not while the sting of humiliation clung to me. Instead, I powered up my personal laptop. Old habits die hard. And for me, vigilance was instinct. I logged into my private archive of security logs, copies I'd been keeping for years. Within minutes, the pattern came alive across the screen, strings of unauthorized probes tapping at the company's firewall, the same ones I had warned about that morning. Only now, they weren't casual brushes. They were systematic, relentless, like a thief circling a house, testing every window and lock. My pulse quickened. I leaned forward, tracing the timestamps. 7:58 p.m., 8:04 p.m., 8:10 p.m. The intervals were tightening. Whoever was out there wasn't just curious. They were rehearsing, preparing. I reached for my phone. My first thought to fire off one last warning to the directors. Logic told me they'd ignore it, but conscience told me I had to try. I opened my email, typed in the subject line, "Urgent, breach escalating tonight," and hit send. A red notification bounced back almost instantly. Account disabled. Access denied. I tried again from another address. The same result. Every link I had to the system was already severed. They hadn't just fired me, they had silenced me. The realization sank deep. I was watching the company's front door being tested in real time, and I had no way to shout across the street that the hinges were breaking. Anxiety twisted in my chest, sharp and unrelenting. I refreshed the logs again and again, hoping for the numbers to slow, for the pattern to vanish like a bad dream. Instead, it grew clearer, more deliberate, a digital drumbeat of an enemy advancing. I sat back in my chair, pressing my palms against my temples. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer. This was the moment before the storm. The stillness that makes your skin crawl because you know thunder is already on the horizon. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the red lines crawling across my screen. They were signals no one else wanted to hear. Signs no one else would see. The company was asleep, blindfolded by arrogance, lulled by laughter on the golf course. I was alone with the truth, and the truth was pounding at the gates. Before we move forward, let me ask you, what do you think will happen when those gates finally break open? Will Maribel be pulled back into the chaos, or will the company collapse without her? Share your guess in the comments, and stay with me until the end. Because the way this story unfolds may not be what you expect. The first vibration came at 9:32 p.m. A message lit up my phone. "Systems failing. Are you seeing this?" I barely had time to process before another arrived. Then another. By the fourth alert, my screen was a wall of frantic texts from colleagues who had once avoided my eyes in the office but were now begging for clarity. I opened one thread. All accounts frozen. Another. Funds moving without authorization. Millions gone already. And then the one that made my stomach lurch. It's 1.1 billion, already siphoned. For a moment, I just stared, unable to breathe. $1 billion. More money than most nations keep in reserve. Disappearing in minutes like water down a drain. The numbers weren't abstract. I could see them in my mind as red streaks across my earlier logs, the ones I had begged them to notice. Now it was too late. I tried to open my old credentials. One last attempt to check the live dashboards, but the lockout screen flashed again. Access denied. My hands shook on the keyboard. I was watching a house burn from across the street, and the firefighters had barred me from touching the hose. The messages grew more desperate. "Maribel, what do we do?" one manager wrote, as if suddenly remembering who I had been. Another pleaded, "You warned us! How bad is this going to get?" My fingers hovered above the keys, but I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because anything I said now would only deepen the wound. They hadn't wanted my voice hours ago. Now they wanted it too late. Then came the call. Unknown number, late hour. I answered out of instinct. "Ms. Carter," a male voice said briskly. "This is Jacob Miller with the Financial Tribune. Off the record. Can you confirm whether you had advance knowledge of this breach? Some are saying you raised concerns this morning." The accusation was woven into his tone, subtle but sharp. Or, he added after a pause, did you have some kind of involvement? The timing of your dismissal is peculiar. I froze. The humiliation of being marched out was still raw, but this was something darker. Suspicion. The story could flip in a heartbeat, from loyal guardian ignored to traitor complicit. I had nothing to do with it, I managed. My voice hoarse, but he was already scribbling. I could hear it in the scratch of his pen. My denial would be printed alongside his doubts, half believed at best. When the call ended, I sat in silence, the glow of the city through my window mocking me. I was both witness and ghost, watching billions vanish, watching trust evaporate, powerless to stop either. Horror gnawed at me, but beneath it lay something colder, the recognition that truth alone was never enough. By the following morning, the name began to circulate, not in hushed tones, but splashed across headlines and whispered through every corridor of the company. The hacker wasn't some faceless figure from a foreign syndicate. It was Charles Whitmore, William Dane's golf partner of more than 20 years. The revelation struck harder than the numbers themselves. It wasn't just money that had been stolen. It was trust, proximity, and pride. I sat in my apartment scrolling through articles, each one sharper than the last. Charles wasn't described as a shadowy criminal, but as a close associate of Dane. Photos flooded the feeds. Charles in his pressed polo shirt, laughing beside the CEO at charity events, clinking glasses at galas. And then, the one that went viral, the image of Charles and Dane shaking hands on the green just hours before the breach unraveled. The caption beneath was merciless. Deals made on the course. The bitterness in my chest deepened. I had been silenced, dismissed, paraded out like a liability, while the real danger had been sitting shoulder to shoulder with the man who fired me. But as I absorbed the news, something darker twisted through the narrative. On an internal message board, a new thread appeared. What if Maribel knew? What if she was in on it with Charles? The comments multiplied quickly. She warned us this morning. Too convenient, don't you think? Fired at 5, breach at 9, lines up a little too neatly. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't enough that I had been discarded. They were now painting me as a traitor. In the absence of proof, suspicion grew like wildfire. And I was the perfect scapegoat, the former security chief with a bitter motive, conveniently removed just before the company's worst failure. I slammed the laptop shut, but the words clung to me. My reputation, the very thing I had built over a decade and a half, was unraveling at the speed of rumor. The irony was cruel, while the true betrayer was Dane's most trusted friend. I was the one marked with doubt. I thought of the look in Dane's eyes the day before. That smug dismissal when he pushed my report back across the table. He hadn't just ignored me. He had protected Charles without knowing it. He had chosen vanity over vigilance. And now he was bleeding billions, and still, somehow, I was the one accused of treachery. The realization burned. Truth didn't matter. Optics did. And in the court of public perception, I was already guilty. Late that evening, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message. At first, I thought it was another cruel rumor or a baseless accusation. Instead, it was a file. The subject line read, "You should hear this." The sender was one of the board members I'd worked with occasionally, someone who had always treated me with polite distance, but never warmth. Curiosity tugged at me, and I opened it. It was the audio from the emergency board meeting. The room crackled with tension even through my headphones. Dane's voice came first, smooth at the edges but trembling underneath. This was unforeseen. No one could have anticipated an attack of this scale. A director snapped back. No one? Your chief of security warned you. We have it in writing. Papers rustled, chairs shifted. I imagined Dane's face tightening, the sweat beading at his temple. He stammered. She was exaggerating. You know how Carter is, always seeing threats in shadows. A chorus of disbelief followed. 1.1 billion is not a shadow. Another director fired. It's negligence, and worse. It was negligence you chose over a game of golf. I leaned back in my chair, the bitter taste in my mouth mixing with something sharper. Almost sweet. For the first time. Dane was being cornered, not by me, but by his own peers, the people whose approval he had spent years cultivating on fairways and banquet halls. The voices overlapped, accusations flying. Someone read aloud the viral headline, "Deals made on the course." Another slammed him with figures. Stock dropped 30% overnight. Do you have any idea what that means for our investors? Dane tried to steady himself. Charles deceived us all. He was my friend. Your blindness was the deception. A woman cut him off. Her voice was like a blade. As the arguments crescendoed, a quiet ping drew my eyes back to the message thread. A single line appeared from the board member who had sent me the file. Wish we had listened to you sooner? The words pierced deeper than any insult ever had. For years, I had fought to be heard, to prove that diligence mattered more than optics, that truth mattered more than golf scores. Now, acknowledgement came, but only after billions were gone and my name had been dragged through suspicion. It was a consolation too late to redeem, yet still enough to twist the knife in Dane's downfall. I closed my eyes and let the chaos of their meeting wash over me. The empire was cracking from the inside, its leader flailing under the weight of his own arrogance. And me? I was on the outside, silent but vindicated. It was a chua-ksat kind of satisfaction, the kind that didn't heal but reminded me that sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes. It whispers in leaked recordings, proving you were right all along. The following week unfolded like a controlled demolition. Every morning's headlines were sharper than the last. Whitmore heist wipes out $1 billion. Golf course trust shattered. Stock plummets 42% in 3 days. I scrolled through the stories on my phone without flinching, the screen casting pale light across my apartment. By midweek, the trading floor was a battlefield. Reports described investors storming out of meetings, demanding resignations, dumping shares as if the company were a sinking ship. I could almost picture the monitors flashing red, brokers shouting into headsets, the empire that once looked untouchable, unraveling in real time. Television anchors dissected Dane's every decision, playing footage of him smiling on the golf course beside Whitmore. Blind trust or complicity? One commentator asked. Another replied, either way, the leadership is finished. Their voices carried no sympathy, only the ruthless cadence of people circling a fallen titan. I should have felt vindication, a rush of triumph after years of being dismissed. Instead, I felt a strange coldness settle in. I watched as if through glass, detached yet alert, like someone studying an experiment she already knew the outcome of. Then came the sting that cut deeper than the headlines. The federal investigators arrived at company headquarters, seizing servers, storage drives, and encrypted backups. I received the news from a former colleague who texted me a single line. They've taken everything you built. I knew what she meant. The system I had designed, the firewalls, the detection grids, the architecture painstakingly layered over a decade, was carted off in boxes and evidence bags. Yet in every press briefing, every report, not once did my name appear. The very thing I had poured my life into was being examined as evidence of failure, stripped of any trace that it had been mine. It was erasure twice over, first as an employee, now as a creator. My work lived, but only as a corpse dissected by strangers. I closed the blinds against the city lights and sat still, fingers pressed together tightly in my lap. There was no rage, no tears, only a steel-like restraint that surprised even me. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of humiliation calcifying into something harder. Or perhaps it was clarity. I didn't need to shout anymore. The collapse spoke louder than I ever could. Outside, the world was watching a company bleed to death. Inside, I was watching myself vanish from its history. And in that silence, cold and unbroken, I understood. Sometimes survival means letting them erase you, so you can rewrite the ending on your own terms. The call came on a gray Thursday morning, just as the rain began tracing lines across my apartment window. I recognized the number immediately, the board's office line, for a moment. My breath caught. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Ms. Carter," a woman's voice said, formal but measured. "The board would like to invite you back. We believe it's time to restore stability, and frankly, restore your reputation as well." The words struck me like sunlight through a crack in storm clouds. Restore your reputation. After weeks of humiliation, suspicion, and erasure, the possibility of justice flickered in me. I asked when they wanted to meet. "Today," she replied. "The sooner we move forward, the better." By afternoon, I was sitting in the same glass tower that had spat me out like a liability. Only this time, I was ushered into the boardroom itself, where faces that once ignored me now offered stiff smiles. Dane was absent. His downfall had become too public, but the others greeted me with practiced warmth. "Maribel," one director began, "we should have listened. You were right. And now the company is suffering because we failed to act. We'd like you to return, help rebuild the system you created, and lead us through this crisis." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to pride stir again. My work, my voice, it mattered. The humiliation might finally give way to vindication. I nodded slowly, almost daring to believe that redemption was within reach. Then the paper slid across the polished table. "Of course," another director said smoothly. "As a formality, we'll need you to sign this agreement before resuming your duties. A simple NDA to protect the integrity of the process." I skimmed the document, and the fragile hope inside me cracked. The lines weren't about integrity, they were about silence. By signing, I would forfeit any right to speak publicly about the breach, about my warnings, about the day I was escorted out while they laughed behind their screens. In exchange, I would be allowed to patch the holes, but without recognition, reduced to a nameless mechanic fixing what arrogance had broken. My fingers tightened on the pen they had so confidently placed beside the papers. For a moment, I pictured myself signing, reclaiming a title, walking through the halls as the savior they needed. It would have been easy to surrender, to let the world think I had been restored. But beneath that temptation was a deeper truth. This wasn't justice, it was containment. They didn't want me back. They wanted me buried in silence while they paraded stability to shareholders. My return would be a performance. Nothing more. I pushed the papers back across the table, my voice calm but final. "You don't want me to lead. You want me to disappear behind your firewall of silence. I won't do it." The smiles faltered. One director cleared his throat. Another shifted uncomfortably. But none challenged my words. In that silence, I understood the truth. I had not been offered redemption. I had been offered a cage with cleaner walls. I stood, gathering my bag. "If you want the system saved, you'll need to do it without me." The boardroom doors closed behind me, and with them, the fragile illusion of justice shattered for good. The air felt different as I stepped into the rival firm's headquarters. It wasn't just the sleek design of the building or the view of the skyline stretching beyond the glass. It was the way people looked at me. Not as a liability, not as a scapegoat, but as someone who had weathered fire and still stood tall. The offer had come quickly after the breach, delivered with none of the smugness I had grown used to. They didn't want me to stay quiet. They wanted me to lead. The title was heavier than any I'd carried before. Chief Security Architect of the Future Systems Division. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a reclamation of everything that had been stolen from me. On the morning I signed the contract, the news cycle exploded. Dane had resigned in disgrace, unable to survive the storm he had created. Whitmore, his trusted golf partner, had been arrested. The money scattered across accounts, but his reputation permanently ruined. And the company that had marched me out like an embarrassment, its stock collapsed again. This time, for good. Once the giant in the field, it now clung to relevance while competitors circled. I set my pen down on the dotted line, the ink still drying as I leaned back in my chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The same hand that had once packed away family photos in a cardboard box was now signing a contract that reshaped the rest of my life. The humiliation of being discarded for missing a golf game had transformed into the triumph of leading an empire built on vigilance, not vanity. Walking out of that office with my new badge clipped to my jacket, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not fiery revenge, not even gloating, just a deep, steady affirmation that dignity can't be stolen, it can only be surrendered. And I had refused to surrender. Sometimes victory doesn't come from fighting louder. It comes from standing still, letting arrogance destroy itself, and choosing the path that honors who you are. I was humiliated for skipping a golf game. Yet in the end, I left with my dignity intact and a future no one could erase. Now I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Was walking away the strongest revenge of all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. And if this story resonated, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories ahead that you won't want to miss.